The virtual work session of the Annapolis City Council will be called to order at 3:03 Thursday, July 16, 2020. At this time, would everybody unmic and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Oh, got a flag.
I pledge
allegiance
to the flag of the United
States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
Hey, no roll call. Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item.
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda is ID 197-20, City's response to the apartment fire on Spa Road.
I move that we adjourn. No, I'm only kidding.
Could we bring up OEM and fire, please?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
We've got kind of a lot to fit in this agenda. I'm wondering if we have any allocation of time for each item.
Sure. That's it.
Because, I think we'll need at least, the latter two items are probably at least half an hour for the budget. And then the APF might take a while longer. I don't know.
Okay. I'll sort of time them, and it seems to be going a bit longer. We will mention that. Okay, guys, welcome, man. Great job. Thank you. Thanks for making us proud. Thank you for saving lives. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. So I believe OEM had a little slide presentation for you. So if that comes up, we'll take a look at it. But we'll start talking about the fires aspect of the incident and then move into everything else. So I don't know if Julian has their PowerPoint or not.
Julian, you have the PowerPoint? Thank you.
So as they're bringing it up, this incident was a structure fire in the 1000 block. It's actually 1008 Spa Road on the 25th of June. And you can go to the next slide if you like. But right around 4:03 hours, the fire department, and this is Chief Simmons' aspect of it, but I don't think he was on yet. But this is just part of the objectives as we go through the COVID. And what it was to keep maintaining city services. And I think they just wanted to point that out as we went forward. But you can go to the next one. And again. So I don't have the presentation in front of me, so I'm not sure. But right around 4:03 hours on this date, 911 received calls of a possible structure fire, 1008 Spa Road. This is a 3-story apartment complex that was built in the early 1980s and housed something like 12 units in each building. Our quick response that we talked about in the city of Annapolis was good. We had units on scene within 2 minutes. But when we arrived on location, they had heavy smoke coming from the roof area of this 3-story building. If you go to the next slide. Okay, you can go to the next one too. It'll have some pictures. But as the crews got there, you don't need to see Carol now.
Nice.
Handsome guys.
Good picture.
We have pictures.
Yeah, excellent. So as crews arrived, one of the first things we do is we require crews to do a 360 to see how much fire they have and if the fire is below the firefighters going inside. So they quickly go around the rear of the building and check the structure. People were evacuating. There was a storm getting ready to roll through the area. So it was humid out. But as they did their, what we call 360, they got to the rear of the building and they saw heavy fire up in the attic area there. The fire you're seeing here, when we first arrived on location, it was just smoke pouring out. But within like 3 minutes, that's what we started to see. You can go to the next slide. So that time of the afternoon, we're concerned about occupants in the building. So we start to knock on doors as crews arrive. They're actually hooking up to the water supply. We have an excellent water supply here in the city of Annapolis, so water was not an issue. We sent crews inside the building to make sure the building's evacuated. As those crews were inside, that fire started extending rapidly through the roof area there, which is a concern for us. Chief Spriggs was the first chief officer there. He took command of the incident and commanded it throughout the incident. The first units on scene called for what we call working fire dispatch. So they called additional units right off the bat. And quickly after that, Chief Spriggs called for a second alarm. He then had to pull our people out of the building, even though the whole building had not been searched yet because of those heavy fire conditions. And what you see is those large hose streams there. They knocked down the fire so we could go back inside. You can go to the next slide. So we evacuated from the building. As we evacuated, our crews were knocking on doors, getting people out. As we were pulling our people out for their safety, they actually had an occupant in the building. This is not the occupant, but they had an occupant who was wheelchair bound that they were able to extract from the building as they were evacuating. We did a quick knockdown on the fire, then we sent our crews back in to start searching all the apartments. There were several residents outside that were concerned about their pets. We had to get the police actually up to the scene because we were worried about people starting to run back in to get their pets out of the building. If you go to the next slide. We put our members back in. They started checking every apartment. Like I said, there was 12 apartments in there. Unfortunately, the fire started to progress again in the roof area. And before we could tell our people they had to get out again, we had what we call a mayday. And what a mayday is when a firefighter's in trouble. We had a roof collapse on 2 crews. So the roof assembly, they were on the 3rd floor trying to check apartments. The roof assembly came down on top of them with fire on top of that. They called a mayday saying that they were in trouble. One of the firefighters was quick to extricate herself from it. She grabbed the hose line, knocked the fire down as the other firefighters extricated. So when we put people inside, we have what we call a rapid intervention crew that's ready to go in and save our people if they're in trouble. They were ready to deploy, but fortunately enough, our people were able to extricate themselves very quickly out of that. And we pulled them out. We knocked the fire down. And all in all, we had, I forget the total number of firefighters now. I believe it was 93 firefighters from Annapolis, Anne Arundel County, United States Naval Academy, and BWI Airport Fire Department that were on the scene. And while our units are fighting this fire, and you can go to the next slide, while they're fighting this fire, we're having units transferred to the city of Annapolis to cover our stations. So Queen Anne's County actually transferred crews over to cover our stations as we were extinguishing the fire. Our crews went back in. They made sure everybody was out of the building. They were able to rescue several animals out of the structure. And then we did have another firefighter that had some debris come down on him and get injured afterwards that had to be transported to the hospital. But you can go to the next slide. So during all this, it's sort of unique. For a regular structure fire, we can usually take care of the family, call Red Cross in. But when we have a building of this size and that many occupants in there, and a storm that rolled through, and a severe storm rolled through at the time, we need to be able to put those occupants somewhere. We need to be able to get them in one area so that we can determine if anybody's missing, so they can be interviewed about the fire. The good thing about this area here was, as you can see in this picture, they had some carports. So we were able to shelter those people underneath the carports until such a time that we could get them moved to another area. And that's where the Annapolis Police came in and the Office of Emergency Management to help us facilitate transportation for them. They got them to Pip Moyer. And as they go into this a little more, you can see what they did with it. But this was a very vast and unique situation where multiple city agencies work together. And as they go through, they'll even talk about how transportation and Department of Public Works were involved in it. You can go to the next slide. So you can just see the amount of fire we had here. Most of the fire was in the attic area. On the rear of this building, as you see, it's 3 stories here. On the rear of the building, there was fire from the bottom apartments all the way up that was ignited on the rear of the building. The building is also on a steep angle back there, so getting ladders back there was difficult. We could not get apparatus back there, so everything we did back there was hand-carrying tools and hoses and ladders to the rear of the building. You can get the next slide. So all in all, it's caused about $1.3 million worth of damage. There were 39 occupants that had to be relocated and several animals, with 1 firefighter injury. And that firefighter was an Anne Arundel County employee who was injured in the fire, but I believe that person is back to work at this point. Go to the next slide. Maybe, maybe not. As you can see, for us, this is hard to do social distancing once we get to this point in the fire scene. But the areas here, we send our people to rehab. So after they start going through the fire, they get through one air bottle, they have to go to rehab. They have to be medically evaluated before we can put them back in service. But you can just see the number of firefighters here that were on the scene. And I'll let Chief Spriggs, if you have anything to add to it.
Sure. Well, one of the most important decisions that we have to make as chief officers is when to allow our personnel or when to send our personnel into structures, especially something this size and the amount of fire that was presented to us. And we were on the scene relatively quick. Our first officer or our first person arrived within seconds of dispatch. And so we knew we had a large amount of fire right away. And we have to make that determination of when it's safe to risk our personnel's lives to put a fire out. And it's not an easy decision to make, but in this particular instance, it was. And, you know, I attribute part of that to the pandemic that's going on. This was the middle of the afternoon, it's 4 o'clock. We know that so many of our residents are teleworking. And so we knew that that building was full of people. And I had no choice, we had no choice but to make the decision to allow our personnel or to send our personnel in there to affect as many rescues as possible. And looking at some of the officers' reports from the first arriving companies, they were passing people in the hallway, banging on doors and getting people to come out as this building is filling with smoke. I just think that our people did a tremendous job. I have the utmost respect for what they did. And it's scary for me as an incident commander, standing there watching this enormous amount of fire over top of their head, but knowing that they're in there trying to save lives. And I can't credit them enough. I had the opportunity to walk Alderwoman Finlayson around the fire scene. This was in her ward, just to show her some of the devastation. I believe the mayor came there as well and toured it. And we were very fortunate that we only had the one minor injury. And we're very fortunate that we got every single person and every single animal out of that building with not one civilian injury. That speaks volumes for our fire department.
You had a tree limb collapse.
So I believe that the Office of Emergency Management is going to pick up and just let you know about the evacuation of the occupants and using a pit moyer and how crisis management and Red Cross were involved, how the crisis team and Red Cross were involved, and also the tree that came down with Public Works. So I'll turn it over to Chief Simmons, I believe, and you can go to the next slide if you like.
Go to the next slide. Just keep going. Next slide. Next slide. So this was a team effort, and I have to give kudos to Chief O'Malley and Deputy Chief Spriggs, because I think this is the biggest fire since the Annapolis Yacht Club in Annapolis that I know of. And it was a dangerous fire, and it was a lot of heroics from the Annapolis Fire Department. So hats off to them and their performance that day. But I just want to talk about some of the things that went on in the background to support the fire department. So as far as the police department, Sergeant Hernandez Walter, Tanya, she was in charge. She did a great job. Her job was, as the officer in charge, she was responsible for crowd control, traffic control, detouring, and just supporting the fire department. Next slide, please. What I noticed about her during this whole incident is her customer service. So this was a rescued pet and that she took charge of, and she made sure that pet got to the owner. The next couple of slides, please. So, and I do believe we may hear from one of the displaced residents on this call. So, Office of Emergency Management, myself, my Deputy Director, Dave Mandel, MK Seborowski, and Caitlin, we began response efforts immediately. We could actually walk out from OEM and look in the sky and see the plume of smoke. We knew that this was pretty serious. So myself and MK staffed the EOC while we sent Dave to Pit Moyer to be ready to receive folks there. and Caitlin Tish was actually detailed to the scene to support the chief and the deputy chief. Next slide. Next slide, please. So when it's all said and done, this is what the fire looked like. It was the fire department in charge. Off to the right, you had the OEM liaison that supported them and anything that they needed right there. You go down to the next level on the left, you had Annapolis Police Department. They were in charge of crowd control and traffic control, Office of Emergency Management, and what we were managing was Recreation and Parks for Shelter, Crisis Response, the American Red Cross, the Hilton Garden Inn, which actually took in the displaced residents, and transportation, and then Public Works in there. We had sort of an emergency with the tree down, and Public Works sprang into action. Next slide, please. So immediately we called Rec and Parks. We talked to Rodney Dillard and Archie Trader, and they wasted no time setting up Recreation and Parks as receiving the displaced individuals. As you know, their emergency support function is sheltering. So they have training in that and they know how to do it well. So they were there and they immediately had blankets, water, snacks, and hygiene kits ready. Next slide, please. We also reached out to Annapolis Transit Director, Rick Gordon, asked him for one bus. Rick Gordon, thinking ahead like he always does, he sends us two buses because we know we had to practice physical distancing and all. So he made two buses available. They moved the displaced residents to Pip Moyer where they were processed. And he had a second bus. They made multiple trips and ultimately to the Hilton Garden Inn. Next slide, please. Crisis response, who you gave a presentation to. That team was led by our own Sergeant Nicole Baden. They responded to Pip Moyer to provide support and resources and emotional support to the displaced residents. They were able to actually go out and get pet food, pet supplies for at least two of the families. And we had Joe Hudson, who's detailed to the Office of Emergency Management from the police department, also went out shopping for critical needs for a couple of families. And you see pictures of Jen and Steve, but they didn't show up. They had a couple of well-abled clinicians that showed up. Next slide, please. We also contacted American Red Cross, who processed them not only for their immediate needs, for any long-term needs that they have. And I understand that the American Red Cross is still dealing with some of the displaced residents. Next slide, please. So what were the immediate needs that we had to tend to right away? There were shoes. At least one person escaped without shoes. We had to go buy shoes. Pet supplies, we had several pets. Infant supplies, emergency funding for lodging. We had to work with the fire department to get back in for some vital medications and medical apparatus, face coverings, and lodging. Next slide, please. So we have a relationship with the Hilton Garden Inn, and we had O'Callahan's even before that. We for emergency purposes, whether it be snowstorms, hurricanes, we have an agreement with them that they supply a large bank of rooms for us just in case we need to house Public Works or lodge Public Works there, or the fire department or police department, whatever we need at discounted rates. So we called them. Mary Parks is the manager over there. She just sprang into action. Anything that we needed, she actually took in the displaced residents and the pets. So kudos to them. Next slide, please. So during this incident, we had some torrential rains come through, which actually knocked down a tree and blocked Silipana. And things were paralyzed until we could get that remedied. So I called Marsha Patrick, then the acting director in Public Works. She sprang into action. She had some folks in the recovery zone. She dispatched them to the fire scene. They cut off the tree and took it away pronto. So thank you there. Next slide. So we do have a person on the line. Vicky, I think her name is Vicky. Are you on the line? We have one of the residents online. Julian, did you get that information on the resident?
We sent it over, but I think she's having some trouble actually getting in. I haven't been able to get her in.
Okay.
Been going forth the hand for the last about 15 minutes trying to sort it out.
So her name is Patricia Hawk, and she wanted to come on and thank the fire department and tell the council about her experience with this fire, but I think we're having some technical difficulties and we're unable to do that. We don't have Ms. Hawk, right? Julian? Okay, I got a note saying no, she's not on. Thank you. So questions at this time? Any questions from the council?
Hi, yeah. I guess I have to ask the obvious question was the building sprinkled or not?
So you know how we feel about sprinkler systems. What
Yes,
I can tell you, this is, while we tell you nothing is 100%, this fire was in the attic area. And even if the building would have been sprinklered, more than likely we would have had the massive fire that we had. But this building was not sprinklered. It was built in the 1980s and was not sprinklered.
Thank you. Thank you for saving all the pets.
I don't know if the mayor's.
Sheila.
Sorry.
I'll call him Sheila.
A little multitasking here. Amazing. Sheila, Alderman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have this presentation at my request because I had an opportunity to see it at one of the meetings that Kevin has, Director Simmons has daily. And I was on site for the fire after it was out, actually, and had firsthand an opportunity to see everybody at work. And I wanted to share that with all of you because we pretty much have a general idea about what fire does, but not until you're on the scene do you actually get the experience and understand the danger that they pose every single day. And the men and women, and I think the deputy mentioned the young woman who saved one of the residents. They are out there working for us, but they're working in tandem with the police department who stepped in, and recreation and parks that stepped in, and transportation that stepped in, and public works that stepped in. You know, everybody came as they were needed, and they were a well-oiled machine, and the residents were grateful. Even the folks that lived across the street were calling me to ask what they could do to help. But everyone came together. This is what OEM does, you know, and now all of them know that when they are called upon, there is not a hesitation. So we should commend all of the departments that work so well together to make our city a far safer and better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Pindell-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I like to, like Alderwoman Finlayson, commend everyone in the city who does an admirable job every day. And this just pointed out what we have. Also, I'd like to thank our partners, our surrounding partners, County, Queen Anne's, Anne Arundel County, those who came in to help with this fire. A tremendous job, just a tremendous job. And for all those sayers or naysayers who say that we should privatize or we should fold in to the county and not have a city fire department or police department or OEM, I think this brings to bear why we need a city fire department and we need city fire services. And the last thing I wanted to say, I think this is a Chief O'Malley, because I've heard this too, the story about the purse. I thought that was indicative of how far our city folks go, well, way beyond the call of duty to actually provide for the residents. And Chief O'Malley, I'm going to let you tell the story about the purse. Chief, you're on mute.
I think he was.
Yeah, Chief Spriggs is going to take that one.
Okay, Chief Spriggs, tell us the story, everyone the story about the purse.
Sure. So one of the residents, if the story goes correctly, hopefully I tell it correctly, but was in need of some medication or some other personal effects that were in a purse. And I believe this particular resident lived on a third floor apartment in 1008 Spa Road. And so we actually, Captain Edwards, I believe, came back to the scene and arranged for a crew to go up to that resident's apartment. Unfortunately, they were not very familiar with which particular purse the resident wanted. So they grabbed every purse that this resident had and brought all the purses back to Pip Moyer so this resident could get the things that they needed out of the purse. So I think she was very pleased with the results. She obviously didn't want all of her purses, but we go above and beyond to make sure they get what they want.
Absolutely. And I think that's a striking story about how our city operates on all levels. Thank you for your leadership, Mr. Mayor, and all of our directors and leaders within city government, as well as those who are on the ground level. Thank you all so very much. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Can I just make, I just didn't want to forget about our city manager, David Jarrell, because I'm sure he was behind the scenes, giving direction as well.
Well, I'm proud of being part of an A team. Thank you for making all of us look good. We really, truly appreciate it. Alderman Paone has his hand up, but not his mic on.
Now I do. In talking to the officers that I know, they certainly gratefully accept the thanks of everybody, but they'll tell you that's what they get paid for. We pay them well, and that's their job, and they do it well. They're very proud of that.
All right. Anybody else? Thank you so much for the presentation. We're so grateful that we have you. Thank you all. Let's have a round of applause for these guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney.
Mr. Mayor, they did have the tape of the EMT saving my life at one point, but I think the chief decided they ought to go burn that one, just in case anybody ever finds it.
I'll have to thank him for that. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda. Might have lost him. Director Nash, I see, is on screen here. Sort of.
You want me to read the
title? I think maybe Mike's dropped out. Can you take it from here, Sally?
Sure, I will improvise. The next item on the agenda is from the Department of Planning and Zoning on adequate public facilities, or APF. Julian, could you start the PowerPoint, please?
Sally, is this the one that we received from David?
No.
Gerald?
I sent it to Gina. It's on the agenda.
Okay. I don't have it. Give us 1 second.
Okay. It's on Planning and Zoning website as well, if that's easier. I didn't realize my camera was back. I thought that looked strange.
Thought you were in your basement or something.
I think Mike went down to our basement.
Thank you for your patience. It's ID 19820, Julian.
While there's dead air, you want to read your remarks?
Yep.
Okay, give us 1 second. It's loading now.
Oh, these remarks, yeah.
There it is. Thank you, Julian.
Thanks, Julian.
All right, I'd been asked by Alderman Savage and Alderman Arnett, I believe, to give an update on adequate public facilities. Next slide. As many of you know, in January, after a long several nights of hearings, the Board of Appeals remanded an adequate public facilities certification approval that the Department of Planning and Zoning had made in regards to the Seasport Shopping Center case. The appeal was to the APF certification, which is a small part of the overall project. But after 40 hours, the board found that there were certain facilities that the staff needed to go back and look at more carefully and make sure all the standards had really been addressed explicitly.
Fred, can you mute? Oh, thanks.
So next slide. In response to the board's decision that was given in January, I worked with the Office of Law to develop a strategy to address their concerns, both in specific regard to this project, but also just overall how we manage our APF certification. So we developed a timeline with 3 parts. The first part was most immediately looking at the shopping center and how to we would revisit the sections that the board had found deficient. The second was to update our website, which was desperate need of updating with more specifics, and to also update our report templates, because we found that we weren't always getting consistent information from each department, and we were not always getting a lot of detail from each department. So the Office of Law developed some templates that are now in use for every project. And I want to thank Joel for all of his work with that. The third step is an even longer term effort, and this is to look at our adequate public facilities law, look at what other jurisdictions do, get together with stakeholders, figure out how we can improve the process and what changes to the law that we need to make. Next slide. So the remand specifically called out these 5 facilities. And so we looked at those carefully, but we looked at all of them actually in order to make sure that we are really doing this right and getting all of the information out transparently so people can recreate how we determine whether a facility is adequate or not. Next page. If you go to our website now, or if you look at adequate public facilities certifications that we've issued since then, you will see that instead of being 5 pages, they are now 70 pages, which maybe is overkill, but we definitely now explicitly state the standards, what we've looked at, and how we arrived at our determination as staff. Next slide. one of the main things that was lacking, especially on the website, was specifics and standards. There are a lot of things that professionals use to evaluate a project based on professional knowledge and best management practices that won't be in the code, but are something that they rely on a day-to-day basis. And I wanted to try and make sure that anyone could look online and see what these are. Next slide. So in the code, each facility more or less follows this structure: purpose, responsibility, goals, exceptions, standards, mitigation, opportunity to mitigate, and process. We've added online and in our report templates these additional applied standards, which just make it explicit. So like when we're looking at whether there's enough adequate water supply, I want it to show, well, we've looked at the storage facilities that are recommended by the American Water Works Association. And this is what they recommend, and this is what we have. And this is a link to a lot of their reports. So you can go and look at their reports and see how we've applied the standards that we have knowledge of through our background, through our professional backgrounds. Next page. So the previous website, I think, was put up when the ordinance was first adopted and promptly neglected. And this was one page. It could fit in one slide. So next slide, please. The updated page I could not fit in one slide. It was much more detailed. I've just given you the URL, and that is correct. The FACI, it just runs out of spaces, I think. I tried to blow it up in the next slide, but it's still, you can't really see it. So in that, you see each section of the code, you see the applied standards that have been developed by the professionals, and any other information that is relevant to how staff determines adequate public facilities. And that is done for each of the different sections of APF. Next slide. Actually, you can go the next one too. And the next one, sorry. None of those are really legible, but if you go online, you can see the great amount of detail that is there now. So what's left mainly by and large is this third step, which is getting together with stakeholders, discussing code changes. We're still sort of in the midst of gathering examples from other jurisdictions. Our regional metropolitan planning organization, the BMC, has been doing a study on traffic impact studies. That's been very interesting. They're looking at what is done regionally and what are some best practices. And I've been participating in that. And there are some innovative ways of doing different sections that other jurisdictions do. So we'd like to get all of that information together and start meeting with people. But the main thing I want to think about is if we're making changes to Title 22, to really think about what the point of the adequate public facilities determination is. Next slide. And I want to get your thoughts on this, but I'm thinking we don't necessarily want to embrace adequacy as a standard, but don't we want to think about equitable distribution of facilities, and how do we do that? So how do we make sure that everyone has access to a park? How does we make sure everyone has equal opportunities and access to jobs and access to a clean and safe environment? And how do we codify that in a way that can be determined by professional staff when looking at a development project that is required to do APF? So that is kind of my goal with your blessing. And as time permits, I would like to start thinking about that. Next slide. It's a pretty big work effort. So I'm thinking I might have to do it one at a time. Welcome any input you have. I would be definitely interested in maybe starting with recreation and parks, just because I think there's some immediate things we could do there, like raise the fee in lieu, which is very low and hasn't been adjusted since the original ordinance. And, but, I want to hear what you have to say and what your thoughts on this chapter of the code are, this title of the code. Thank you.
Gavin, you're muted.
Somebody. Everybody's on mute. Who's on mute?
Alderman Pennell Charles had a hand up, then Alderman Finlayson, then Alderman Arnett. That was what I saw.
Thank you so much, Sally. This I'm really encouraged. And I like the equitable public facilities moniker versus the adequate. So I think that shifts the lens and the focus, and possibly, like you said, rec and parks would be probably the most likely place to start. But thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Alderman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, Dr. Nash, is EPF comparable to APF? Is that a new standard that's being set? What does that do when you make that change?
Well, this idea is rather unformed in my mind. So we would have to look at other jurisdictions. I don't know of anyone else who's doing this exact thing. So it would probably take a little bit of work and research. I'm sure there's some models for this part or that part that we could look to. But one idea I have is like about traffic. Like when we do our traffic APFs, it's really focused on the car and making sure the cars can get very quickly from point A to point B. But isn't it more interesting to look at how people interact with that site, how they walk, bike, and drive that site? What kind of changes would we need to make overall to our infrastructure to improve that multimodal access?
Well, go forward. I like the concept of changing that. So, anything I could do to help, if you need some team players to research or whatever, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
I encourage you to move forward on it.
Okay.
Arnett was next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Dr. Nash. This is really, I think, a giant step forward. I have to admit, I've yet to go look at the template, but I'm very interested in this. And as you know, I'm trying to recast the traffic APF to conform to the format that all the other code, and even change the name to auto, whatever it is. I can't think of it right now. But there were also some things that the board talked about that were mentioned sort of generally in the APF, but didn't have a specific category like non-auto specific or police. And so I think one of the things that I'd like to do, and I think it's probably the province of the rules and city government. I think that falls under our committee, but sort of take a general look as you are doing, and happy to do it with you when you're ready. Just the whole structure of the APF and what we're getting with it. Until I saw the slide, I hadn't really thought about the equitable aspect. I've tended to think of this more in terms of engineering. I remember the very belabored testimony at the Board of Appeals hearing about the size of the water stand pipes and things like that, very much engineering kinds of things. This takes it more into a social milieu, so we'll have to think about that. But I did want to certainly thank you and the staff for all the effort and taking this very seriously. I think we've really moved the ball forward quite a bit. And I'd like to see us move it forward even more, but thank you.
Alderman Savage was next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Dr. Nash, for this information. And I think I would like to take some deep dives, maybe in some of the committees would be more appropriate than in the work session format. For example, getting into some of the stormwater APF in environmental matters, because I think I'd like to get a better understanding of exactly how that, and the others, frankly, but just for sake of this discussion, in terms of stormwater, how exactly that's being assessed by not only, I guess, not necessarily even your department, but also Public Works, because they're the ones I think who are reviewing that APF. But in terms of the argument, adequate versus equitable, I do like where you're going with the equitable, and I think that makes a lot of sense for things like recreation, but not necessarily for all the others. I think we still need to have an adequate standard for things like traffic or even stormwater. Actually, I think adequate is I think an important way to look at that. But for traffic, I think you could, like you mentioned, the multimodal transportation, taking a broader approach. There might be maybe you need two different standards. You need one which would be adequate for just simply traffic volume and the adequacy of our roads to handle that volume, but then have a separate standard for transportation. And in the large sense, do people have the ability to take transit here? Do they have the ability to take bicycle traffic, something like that? Because even in my ward, Edgewood Road has an issue where the seniors at the very end don't have any kind of mass transit. They don't have a way to get downtown. They have to go to the Giant first somehow. And so I think that'd be important to look at, maybe for example, Chesapeake Grove project is trying to go in down there. Is there adequate standard or I guess in that sense, equitable transportation capacity? Would they be able to take transit from there? Do they need to pay in? Do we need to figure out some other alternative? Because I don't know if I mentioned to you, but you may have heard me at the Planning Commission mention how there is interest among some of the senior developments in my ward to kind of pull together resources to contribute towards, for example, a small shuttle bus that would presumably be city operated that would go around to the areas of my community. So, I mean, in my ward. So I think that could certainly work in that regard. But I do have other questions, even about, for example, public safety, and maybe this isn't the appropriate time to get into all of it, but I'm curious how that's being calculated, because we just passed a budget, and we did the same thing last year, or maybe the budget before, where we froze a certain amount of police positions. So this year we froze some police positions, and so we no longer have, the APF for public safety is based on having a certain number of officers funded. And so if we've essentially frozen the funding, pretty much, it seems like it'd be hard to make the argument that they're completely funded if that would meet APF. So is there some alternative to APF that we're having them, in terms of public safety, that we're having them look at? Is there an alternative standard? And again, maybe that's not a question for today, but just some kind of deep dive down. Maybe rules and government could get into a bit more. But those are the kind of things. Because I think the larger picture question for me is how are the APF, as it's written in the code, is kind of, it's not necessarily some specific, but other parts of it are not very specific. So I think for me, it comes down to like, how exactly is it being applied? What kind of internal regulations or policies are being created out of our code? And that's what I don't quite understand yet. I'd have to dig into this, what you've sent in terms of the Eastport Shopping Center, just as an example, in terms of how that specifically the codes being applied in those for that project, but not just that project, any project. That makes sense. I know it's a lot to throw at you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Just let me know. I can go through it in a committee meeting. I can, however you want me to do it, I'm happy to go down through the details.
Alderman Tierney, then Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Sally. I know this is a big, heavy lift, and I really, really commend you for not approaching it with just doing the numbers, and checking the boxes. you know how I feel about policy, and we have to establish what our policy is and what we emphasize. This is a really nerdy story, but I went to visit my sister in Florida, and she lives in one of those cul-de-sac developments that I hate, but she was worried about her granddaughter going to school and the schools, if they had adequate schools. So I said, oh, let me look in your Muni code for your adequate facilities. How nerdy is that? But anyways, and what was funny about that was looking at a city's adequate facilities. It's relatively new because it's, I guess, a new government kind of thing. What stuck out was their stormwater distribution, because, you know, they do, you know, there's roads and everything, and they've got these big giant pipes, and you could just by reading their adequate facilities, you thought their priority is stormwater, you know, God level. But my question is, and I know that you're doing this, but how is smart growth principles? How do you align, you know, something that's basically based on numbers to principles, to like smart growth principles? How do you step back and make sure that we accomplish that? And I know that must be really difficult.
Yes, it is. And I think it's a couple of things. We have to take a step back and say, we know there's certain places in the city that are going to change. How do we want them to change? And what is the process we want to go through, and what is the end result that we want to have? And those are very important questions to get at, and to say, are we getting the kind of development that really benefits the community? Are we getting the kind of development that the community really wants? You know, it's never going to be easy because change is always hard, but I feel like we're especially in a difficult time right now for a lot of different reasons. But I'd kind of like to reset that, in the comprehensive plan is a good opportunity to do that, and to take another look at how we've been doing things, take another look at how we could do things better. And I'm very excited that we have our new Chief of Comprehensive Planning on board. His name is Eric Lashinsky. He's actually on this call. Eric, do you want to say hello to everyone? I might have surprised him.
Thank you, Wade.
No, I was ready for that.
Okay.
Well, I'm happy to be here. It's been a few months coming now. I moved up from Texas, as you might have heard. I was in Austin, Texas for the last 5 years, but I am from Annapolis originally, so I'm not starting from scratch, which is very helpful. But I have some catching up to do, and I'm excited to start digging into all these issues and finishing the comp plan as soon as possible. But no, I'm taking a lot off Sally's plate now, so I know she's probably happy to hand off as much as she can.
Doing one job is so much easier than doing two jobs.
You freed her. Sally is free.
But I want to support you all, and we can talk about what's important to your wards as I get into this position. And my background, I should say, I'm a planner, but I'm also an urban designer, and I have a master's degree in architecture, and I started my career in conservation work with the Trust for Public Land in this region. So I was doing conservation easement type work, promoting sensible planning through that angle, and did work on some projects in this region for them. And so, I'm interested in design as much as policy, and I hope I can apply all of that so that this is a good fit for me, I think.
Welcome.
Nice job, Sally. Another superstar. Alderman Gay had his hand up next. So, then Alderman Arnett.
Thanks. I kind of wanted to piggyback a little bit off of what Alderwoman Tierney was saying, and kind of what you started to speak about, Director Nash. And how do you ensure in your department that we are able to meet the needs of communities that desperately need development? and don't understand the process about which it is obtained or how it is created. And their voices are often neglected in these conversations. You pointed at the Eastport shopping center originally. They virtually cut out their voice and what they wanted in that shopping center as patrons of that shopping center. And we see that in the housing conversations. I'm sure as we go forward with development of Eastport Terrace and Harbor House, individuals who don't even live in that community will try to control how the development goes about. So how can your office commit to maintaining, to preserve, the infrastructure of our city and understanding that we are growing and meet the needs of communities that, need development, that need to see growth in housing and grocery chains and just things that help people live? How do you commit to that? Just not verbally, but, on paper. I know that you pointed to the comprehensive plan, but there are things in comprehensive plans from like 2009 that we haven't followed through on that would have eventually helped us get to a better place, I think. So sometimes things are written or said and they aren't followed through with. How do you commit to that?
All right. So a couple of different things. For the comp plan itself, what I would like to do this time is to have a more structured way of identifying the goals and how we're going to actually achieve those goals. So I think in the last plan, there were a lot of really good goals that some of which, like you said, we haven't been able to achieve. We can still have those goals, but I want specific, concrete strategies of how we accomplish those goals. And more importantly, how do we measure success for those goals? Because, we're not going to cure cancer, but is there a way that we can do something in order to move the needle a little bit on addressing some of these really large societal issues that the comp plan touches on? I mean, the comp plan is mainly a land use plan, but it tends to get feathered out and applied to a lot of different areas and ends up being a lot about quality of life that the community expects. We have to get feedback from people, and that's very hard right now to do engagement. It's also hard to do things differently. We tend to do things the way we've always done things, and then we're kind of surprised when we get the same result or we get the same people giving us the same opinions. In order to get a new views, we need to find different ways to reach out to these communities. And for that, I'm going to rely very heavily on you all to help me get into your ward, be able to meet with the people we need to meet with. I welcome any assistance, tips, suggestions from you all of how to do outreach, how to really get the people who this plan is for. A lot of times we end up writing plans with input of people who it's not really their plan. This plan is looking 20, 30 years into the future. We need to make sure that we get the input of those people who are really going to be affected in that time period, which is not to ignore our residents today who are living their lives and dealing with quality of life issues every day. But the point of the comp plan is to look towards the future, set our major policy goals, figure out how we're going to achieve those goals and how we're going to measure success. So that is, what I'm going to commit to you. We'll do an annual report on the comp plan to show our performance measures. Have we reached our targets or not? If not, why not? Is it a matter of money? Is it a matter of political will? Is it a matter of legislation that we need? There's a lot of different reasons why different recommendations from the comp plan don't get implemented. And a lot of times it's money or time, which are precious. We all know those are precious resources. So if these are goals that we can all commit to and there's consensus, then I will want you all to help me push them forward and implement them through policy, through the CIP, through the budget, through the zoning code, in the next few years. Also, we try to always be available to people if they have questions, comments, concerns. We are here. We are, we're not necessarily here, but we are, available by phone, by email. Just tell your constituents, please call us. I hear stories like, well, so-and-so was so confused about such and such. I'm like, why didn't they just call? You know, we could have cleared up the confusion in a 5-minute phone call, and that would be that. So please let your constituents know we are here to help them and to give them information as needed.
Thank you for that. I just have a quick follow-up, kind of broken into 2 parts. You know, because me and my friends we often talk about since now we're talking about really the future of Annapolis, what that looks like. And if there is, you know, true hope for the impoverished communities that exist within the city of Annapolis. You know, and we were talking about with Annapolis being in between bigger cities like Baltimore and DC, and us not being able to pull in the resources to create businesses and to create, you know, affordable housing. What does that do to that population over time? Does it just die out? And so really looking at how do we make those changes come to be? And I guess a second question I have is, within the Department of Planning and Zoning, is there some opportunity to bring in a like chief person of diversity or something like that? I don't know, but somebody who is a minority and who understands the needs of, like, you know, poor urban communities and can speak specifically to what needs to take place within the zoning changes and, you know, the resources necessary to go into those communities, help us find the dollars, help us, you know, get things going. Because if we continue on this same path, even over the course of the next 4 years, with some of the same moderate stances where we don't open up to new change that could potentially help these populations, what does that do? And so is that something that the office could potentially do? Bring in somebody who, you know, has the experience of working in a Chicago or a Baltimore, where they are dealing directly with impoverished communities, where they're able to, they understand where to pull in dollars, they understand on how to communicate and interact with these communities. Like, is that something that we could be open to?
Sure. I don't see why not. We can also as part of the plan definitely is going to need a robust economic development strategy. And we have a very strong team in this department. We have our economic development, Steve Rice and Hope Stewart, who are very strong, have a lot of that good background, as does Teresa Wellman, who has so much experience, knows where all the money is. She's always calling me like, I think I know how we can pay for this project. And it's like, you know, so we have a great team. We have a lot of good experience. I think we could probably use some help for outreach and, you know, outreach strategies. That would be great. We can look at that for, you know, the comp plan, and that kind of outreach would be really nice. I'm happy to work with you, the mayor's office, and our team here, who's very willing and ready to hit the ground running.
Thank you very much.
Alderman Arnett was next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And welcome, Eric. I was quite excited when I read your resume, although I have to admit, when I first looked at you on the screen, I thought, oh my gosh, Tom Smith's grown a beard. I wanted to follow up on Rob Savage's comments. I'm quite anxious to start to dig into some of the details at the policy level. I think that Rob suggested that each of the different committees have some purview. Environmental matters certainly wants to look at the details of how we do stormwater management and save trees and those sorts of things. So I'm looking to you, Dr. Nash. I know you have a million things on your plate, and we do too, but I'm wondering if there isn't a couple of forums that we can set up now as we're in the process of formulating the comp plan, similar to what the kinds of things that Alderman Gay just presented, but also really the questions across the whole community. What do we want to be 20 years from now? What do we want to look like? Sometimes I think we get down into the details of things and get lost in that. Instead, for us as generalists that are elected, I think our strength could be this sort of reasonable person notion of, if you were going to have an Annapolis 20 years from now that isn't the same as it is now, what would you see being different? Because I think that really is the basis for, should be the bottom line purpose for the comp plan. So I really would be excited to get into some discussions like that. I know you're doing it with the community. I didn't get to see the nitty-gritty committee report yet. I'll look at it online, but I think you're doing a lot of good outreach to the community. But sometimes we need to reach out to the council too. We do have some ideas, and we are sort of, just like you're getting buffeted by all the different points of view. We get buffeted too. We get buffeted by the development cohort and by the community cohort, everyone with their own anxiety. So I would really look forward to thinking about setting up a couple of fora where we just sit down and have a general overview chat. I don't know, maybe that's something, Mr. Mayor, you can help us arrange under your leadership. I did want to take a second to mention your leadership, though. I think that this step forward we're making with the APF, but also the step forwards that we're going to be talking about that we've made with our financial things, the kinds of things that we're getting into with the Office of Law, I believe the strengthening of our department heads across the board. Kudos to you and your administration. It feels good. It feels like we're making progress. And it's presentations like this, the one we had from Fire 2, that I think it's when we take time to reflect. We are doing something good and we are making progress. So I wanted to thank you for that.
I think, we've got an amazing team. I think our directors are just knocking it out of the park. And I really think, we're heading in a good direction and we're moving the ship slowly. It's a big ship, takes a long time to move, but there are things that are different that weren't like this a while ago. So thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Sally. Excellent. I was so excited when you told me about that idea. And I think really to give that lens to everything that we do can only make the city better. They're kind of old thoughts. This is a new idea. I love it that no one else is doing it. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nash.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, if you are here.
Yes, sorry about that. I got kicked off.
No worries.
The next one is, the next item on the agenda, Mr. Mayor, is ID 199-20, a budget discussion, lessons learned.
Thank you. David and Jody, are you there? Great. Thank you.
We are here.
Awesome.
So Julian, if you could put the PowerPoint presentation up, I'd appreciate it. So while the budget is still fresh in everybody's mind, we wanted to just have a discussion, and hopefully this will be a discussion because it certainly isn't set up as a presentation, but a discussion of how it went during the last budget cycle, what the lessons learned were, what we can do better, what we did well, and any other input that you may have. So we put together just these initial slides to hopefully prompt some discussions and to sort of bracket off the discussions as to each of the phases. So next slide, please. So this is the agenda. The input from the council, we want input from the council for each of these, but the first one is meant to be on the front end. Planning and principles that could be established in the fall timeframe before we start the budget development process. Just feelings about any value of that. And then the second one, there was a lot of discussion about balanced budget versus structurally balanced budget. So we want to talk a bit about that. The budget documents and preparation, how that all goes. And then it goes to the finance committee. So we want to talk about that process. Work sessions that were held during the budget, whether they were of any value. And then the amendment process, and then periodic updates that we plan to do throughout the year. So next slide, please. So again, this is really looking for input from the council early in the process before we send out the budget guidance to the departments to really inform that budget guidance that we send out to the departments of what the council's will is for the particular budget cycle. Any thoughts about that? Any value in that if we get together? Yeah, go ahead. Director Dickinson is going to be participating too.
I just wanted to add, when we're talking about getting guidance early from the council, I also want to emphasize capital projects, because we had sent out an inquiry last year, I think it was in December, asking for what projects would be on your priority list. And we got a little bit of feedback, but not much. So those are the kind of things we need to know early before we even send out any information, before December, because the 1st of December, late November is when we first send things out to departments. So we would want to have this guidance from you in whatever form you decide to come up with it before we send that out.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you can see us.
Yeah, I can. So, Alderman Savage, do you have questions there?
But just a quick, I guess,
since
you asked David about, so I'm wondering if one of the things I think would be valuable is for the entire council to see presentations on from the departments, and maybe even just using, well, I think I should use the performance standards that the departments used this year. I don't think I caught all of them this year, but the ones I saw were very useful and helpful. I think Marcia set the tone for Public Works and the rest of the departments, and I thought that was helpful. But I don't know, I was just wondering maybe if that would be something that could happen in the fall along with what you have on this list, just to get that started. So, but I don't know when it makes sense to do that in terms of having the departments get together that information.
So
yeah, well, we can answer that, Dave, and then we're going to go to Alderman Arnett, then Alderman Paone, and then Alderman Finlayson. There's a lot of hands waving. I'm sorry, and they're small hands because I can't see you all. Yeah.
So I think most of the things that you would want, like that type of thing, we just need to schedule it and set it up and have it happen. So we did that during the finance committee process this time. I need some clarification on what exactly that you would be looking for in the fall, other than just an update on how what the performance measures are and what the results are thus far to date. But we could certainly set something like that up.
Yes, and I would add that whatever we do in the fall would not deal with what they want in their budget, because they wouldn't be prepared to talk about the following year's budget at that time. If we wait until the April-May timeframe, they'd be prepared to talk about next year and what they want in their budget for next year and what their new initiatives are. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Alderman Arnett was next, then Alderman Pound.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry.
So there's a lot to say, and I will try not to be my usual self and try to say it all. But I like this idea of starting early in the fall at a conceptual level. I think that part of the problem with the budget process is we're dividing it into small increments. We have the mayor huddling by himself and the staff to put together the budget. Then we have the finance committee huddling, and even though we do have valuable visits from our other colleagues, and then with 3 weeks to go, we throw it on to the council in its entirety. And I just don't think there's enough time. I think when you look at the realities of when you get the CAFR, which is sort of the launching point for the actual numbers, and then get the finance committee to go through its argers after it gets the budget from the mayor, first council meeting in April, and has a month to give it to the city council, first meeting in May. That's 2 months for what we're talking about. It's like $450 million when you do both the general, all of the funds and all of the capital, and then all the capital. We're talking about a large amount of money. This is a big corporate entity, and we're trying to do it in increments. And because we do it that way, I think we have to redo things over and over. Finance committee gets up to speed, they form their opinion, then it goes to the council. We tried this year very hard to give the council a walkthrough of the budget binder so that they could see all the pieces, but everybody's busy. And it just seems to me like if we all got together up front and then stayed together through the whole process, we'd have a much more efficient time, and maybe the finance director will keep her sanity. So that's just my general overview. That will require code changes. We had a meeting earlier today at 1 o'clock looking at code, and we need obviously to have the council come together and come to a policy consensus. But it's just way too much hard work and not enough inclusion. I see no strong reason for all of this separating into small puddles of activities that are in a sequential order. Zip.
Thank you. I agree with you. I didn't make this system. Alderman Pound.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wait a minute. Let me turn this one off. There we go. That should be better. I totally agree with my colleague from Ward 8 that we go through, we see some really good presentations, and we are delighted, and we're delighted that a number of our colleagues were able to see these also. But I have to say, by the time we're really getting serious about the budget, I mean, which is really the last week or 10 days, I mean, I think both of my colleagues and myself are kind of sitting there going like this, wondering if we have any more hair to pull out, because our colleagues understandably want to have more information, want to see all the information that we have seen. And it's extremely frustrating for us. I know that to have to go through it, but also we understand it's understandable that our colleagues want to see it too. And I do think we have to move a little bit more toward, I hate to do it because everybody works hard, but we have to work toward the acting almost as a council of the whole, and having the council, visit the lengthy presentations that we see from time to time. Either that or just change the way that we do things, period. Either one would be a help, believe me, but I think the one that we would be nearest to would be just making sure the council's aware of the presentations we're getting and the extent of the presentations. That is the videos and that kind of thing. We seem to have had a lot more of that in the past than we did this year, although what we had this year was really good. I mean, my colleagues that showed up were very helpful for the most part in understanding these things, but we really don't have the time or the inclination to go over things 2 and 3 times. And when I say we, I'm not talking about the finance committee, I'm talking about the council, period, because we all tend to do that. And man, we spent a lot of time on this budget this year, and I don't mind spending the time if it's worth it. And I'm not sure that we really use the time very effectively. Thank you.
Finlayson?
Yes. We used to, several administrations past, we used to have a retreat in the fall. It took place at St. John's College. Everyone was there, all of the aldermen and women, and each department had an opportunity to do a presentation for us. And those presentations were very similar to the ones that we got this year during the Finance Committee deliberations. I'm aware that, you know, they can't give us as much up-to-date information in the fall as they may be able to do in the spring, but they can give us their performance measures and they can talk about historical trends and they can lay the foundation for what their needs might be. Therefore, giving the mayor some foundation from all of them for the preparation of his budget. In the past, the mayor's budget was presented to us in March. And so we had a longer period of time, just as my colleagues have said, to deliberate on the council's budget. We would also have an opportunity to have heard from the department heads. We would have been able to ask questions and gather information to answer those questions so that we would all have a better understanding of the needs of the department. So, you know, I would hope that we would seriously consider going back to doing a retreat in the fall. As I said, I think I said, we were at St. John's College in their big conference room. And so it gave everybody a chance to be together, to talk, to ask questions, and to begin to lay the foundation for the budget that was going to come in the spring. So that's our history.
Alderman Tierney.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me be honest. I attend the Finance Committee meetings, and I've watched the presentations of the departments. And my response to those, other than, you know, what a great job they all do, is, okay, how does this translate into the budget? Is it up to us to say, you know what, they need more money, but they don't need that much money, and this, that, and that, and that? I personally don't think that that is our job. I think our job is to appropriate money where our policies lie. And let me give you an example. Sally just spoke to it. She said she couldn't enforce because she didn't have, or whatever, because she didn't have enough staff. And so, like, hypothetically, just say this fall when we get together in this, and then I'm addressing this first slide because it says guidance. Well, I think that guidance comes from us setting policy. So we come together in the fall and say, you know what? We've been hearing about this defunding police. Let's talk about how we're going to do that. That's a huge policy that can be implemented through our budget, i.e. financing the department respectively. Environment, you know, there's a lot of issues. Otherwise, you're just sort of not knowing where you're going, and it just becomes, you know, like my colleague said, there's this last minute rush to say, oh, I want that in, and that shouldn't be the case. And I find my constituents, and please don't take this the wrong way, but is there something wrong in the process that you go through and two of the people on the Finance Committee ultimately vote against the budget? So that's kind of a weird kind of dichotomy. It's not to say, oh, you know, you review it, you should approve it, but that means that there obviously is something wrong in the process, because your concerns probably could have been addressed up front. So those are just, you know, my observations, but I think there's no question that we should regroup in the fall and set our priorities. We should have done that last year, for example, with the comp plan. That's a big deal thing, the comp plan. You know, police is going to be a big deal thing, and get those on the table, prioritize, have the get together at Quiet Waters or whatever, and then shape the budget accordingly. Thanks.
Thank you. David, did we cut your presentation off?
No, this is exactly what we want. So these are just bullet points to kind of lead to the discussion. So this is perfect.
So like I said, I didn't make the system, but I think we could all be part of changing it, because I agree it becomes this rush, it becomes a conspiracy, and we all want good things for the city. And so I would enjoy to work with all of my council members to create a more efficient system with some room. Alderman Gay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly, I'm in full support of us getting together at some point in a retreat, but I wanted to say a retreat, you're not supposed to retreat in the same city. That just defeats the purpose. So if we do go on a retreat, then at least Deep Creek or something. I mean,
Paris. We want Paris.
Australia's got low COVID. So,
hey, so does Deep Creek Lake. I was just there. It's wonderful this time of year.
Okay, so the next budget is about the schedule, and we got into that a little bit. Right now, it's introduced at the beginning of April. There's a whole lot of work that goes from basically the middle to the end of December until that budget is introduced. The work first is done by the departments, putting their budget into Munis and building that budget, but then it goes over to finance and they do a whole bunch of work. But that all being said, is there enough time right now? So we introduce it the beginning of April, and we have to have it passed by the end of June. Is there enough time in that period to do what we need to do as far as becoming familiar with the budget, having the budget books available, getting everybody up to speed, and then passing a budget by the end of June?
Question, since I am not seeing.
Sheila was the loudest. Alderman Finlayson.
Director Gerald, City Manager Gerald, do you recall why we changed from March to April? We just did that relatively recently, probably within the last 5 years.
I don't, because I wasn't involved with that decision. I suspect it was just to give the departments more time to get their work completed.
Okay, is there any reason why the department heads can't begin to formulate their budgets in the spring, like the state legislature does, so that when the mayor is ready to sit down on January 1, formulating his budget, they already have their information and their ideas all generated, and they know what the requests are going to be and that kind of thing.
Jody, do you want to, or Director Dickinson, would you mind addressing that?
Yeah, so I would not, I think that March, as I know it, in the processes and surrounding jurisdiction, our deadline in April is earlier than most. The process where the departments are coming up with their ideas, then they submit them to us, then we have to look at them. And believe me, there is a ton of going back and forth, asking questions, changing their information, getting payroll data on a spreadsheet and being able to make sure we've got all that consistent. That's an enormous amount of work, and trying to deliver what we're now doing as a book in March would be difficult. It's even difficult to get it out in April because the turnaround time for all that analysis with the departments is time consuming, and we need some time to work with what we have drafted and work with the mayor on what it looks like and what we should do if we have issues that we need to address before it gets finalized. The preparation of the book, that's a feat in and of itself. And as you know, it comes together, and with if we have less time, there's going to be more things that slip through the cracks. Things don't tie. We have to change things. I don't want to be in the position of having to hand you replacement pages because in the hurry to get that out, we didn't have time to check and recheck everything. So I would be leery about trying to make the deadline earlier than your first meeting in April. What I think is that if you end up having your meetings, the department presentations of the budget together, and maybe start those earlier, for instance, the end of April into the beginning of May, then we'd have time with the whole council to discuss any issues. So it would, instead of doing the finance committee process first, then going to council to discuss the budget, that's kind of doubling the process. And with the same time frame, we'd probably get it done sooner if we could have all the meetings together.
So, Jody, my question was why the department heads cannot have their budgets prepared and presented to you earlier, such as November, for example, or even.
Well, so what we're doing now is we asked them at the beginning of December to start putting their budget ideas together. And then we gave them deadlines in January. Well, I think that if we ask them to do it earlier, they're going to have maybe more difficult them for the plan for the next year. I'd have to ask them about their timeline. But remember, I only have Katie as a permanent full-time person, and I'm going to have to work on finding additional staff to help me with the book and help Katie, because I'm doing too much detail work right now. I need to step back and be more of an overview. And so that's something I have to work on too. If we start earlier, that means our time begins earlier too. I guess I'd have to have some conversations with department heads as to how early they think they'll be ready to start putting in their budget request.
Well, I'm contending that we set the timeline, and most of our department heads have been here through multiple budget cycles. And as we learned this time, there's not a whole lot of changes that take place. Really, there aren't. And so I contend it's not going to be as difficult, and maybe it is, but I can't see that it should be more difficult, and to have them go back and look at the historical data to be able to come up with a budget earlier. So I think we need to think differently and see how we can do things. I don't want to say smarter, but at a different pace to spread it out and not leave ourselves in a tight time crunch.
Right. And we have to consider we could move their deadlines earlier and say, please have it to us earlier, but freeing us up to work on that is going to be difficult while we're still working on the financial audit. That gets done in the fall, and the numbers stop moving sometime in November, but that book also is a huge undertaking, and Katie's involved in that too, because I want all my accountants to be working on the financial audit as well, so they're all cross-trained. So trying to free up any of my time and some of Katie's time to start earlier is going to impede on the process with the financial statements.
Okay, the hands that I saw up first were Alderman Paone, Alderman Arnett, and then Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that we probably could do the April thing without a huge problem, but the committee would, at a minimum, would have to know more about what's coming down the road. And if we can get in on the early studies, then I think that would be most helpful. The alternative is simply get it done earlier, whether it's easy or not. I'm thinking the easiest thing to do, or at least the most expedient thing to do, would be to simply let the committee in on what to expect, what's going on, and let us start to form our own plans and our own opinions on what's what with the budget.
On my net.
So I actually think we need to go further than that. The problem is we think of it as the mayor's budget, then the council's budget. It's the city budget. It's always going to be the city budget. I think everybody needs to get in earlier, but we don't need to get in to talk about this number is going to be that size or the other size. I think we need to be talking about what we want the budget to be. Some of the kinds of things that Alderman Gay has introduced into the discussion which are more at our proper level. We're at the 40,000 foot level. I don't have any great budget expertise. I can't do a T account. Well, I can, but I don't want to do a T account or a balance sheet. The things that we should be doing are at the policy level, and we ought to be talking about if we're spending money this way. Alderwoman Tierney brought it up too. If we're thinking about a different way of funding police, those are policy questions. It's not 20 million versus 19.5 million versus 21.5 million. It's where do we want this money to go to do what things? And that's what we got elected to do. And I think that's where we need to stay. There's nobody who has argued more for line item detail than me, but I'm really starting to understand that while there's a place for that, that can be very counterproductive. If that's the end goal, oh, I think this $40,000 should be 35 or 37, instead of, I think we want to accomplish something to make Annapolis different for people of lesser means, to bow to Alderman Gay, or we want to supply more resources to our police department to understand the psychological needs of the clientele, those sorts of things. And in that sense, I think it unites us. And if we're united and working on these things collectively, we can cut out a lot of the wasted time, a lot of the inefficiency. So again, I would really encourage that we be more efficient and to give the finance department the time they need to do the nuts and bolts, and then we stay up. Anyway, all right, that's it. Sorry.
Do you, Alderman Gay, then Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, thanks. I think overall I enjoyed, my first budget process, getting a better understanding of how things work. I appreciated the binder. And I thought that was important, and, being able to reference that and go through. I do think there could be updates made to some of the getting down to some of the specifics. For example, in a lot of the departments and within the budget book, we'll see this money goes, it'll just say like $50,000 and then something next to it, but it doesn't go down to I guess what Ross's point was, line item. I actually would like that to see exactly how each dollar is spent. I think secondly, one thing that I'd like to see change next year is incorporating some use of technology because there are apps and programs created that would allow all of us to operate under one platform so that we're not sending one paper at 12:58, another at 4:57. And then when we get into the meetings, we're all looking, and some people want physical and some, there are programs that allow us to put all those documents into one place. And then lastly, what I'd like to see change is, as it was mentioned previously, a lot of, or this is two parts, a lot of the directors have been here for a long time. And so you just get used to filling out, the standard budget without tweaking to the extremes to meet the needs of communities. And I think one of the things that we did well last year in Bay Ridge Gardens was we had the directors and the mayor's staff come out to the community, walk around, look at each individual problem that needed to be fixed, and they were able to get it done. But if you don't leave the office, if you are, confined to computer work and you aren't able to see what's are actually in some of these communities and what needs to be changed. So I think that prior to the budget, walk around to some of these communities, go to the Stanton Center and get a better understanding of what changes need to be made so that we're not making last minute budget requests. Those things can be worked out with the respective aldermen, and then they can point out hot spots that they think, hey, let's tour this as a group to see what we can do with funding and how we can move those things around. And then lastly, what I'd like to see also is, again, we hear a lot from the directors, but I'd like to start hearing from, the public works staff that are actually out there, cutting the lines or doing the actual work, seeing what they need on the job. Because sometimes that could be, said to a department head or to a deputy department head, and it never makes it out of the room that it was spoken in. And so, the staff look at us as if we aren't making those changes, but in reality, we just didn't know. So I'd like to see, public works staff, Recs and Parks staff come to the actual council tables and speak to some of the concerns they, as the lowest paid individuals within their respective departments, would like to see and how we can make their jobs easier.
Alderman Savage had his hand up next. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, just two quick comments. I guess the first, and I think others have mentioned this, but just getting some complete information earlier on in the process. I think this year was much better than last year, because I know last year we didn't get the fees and fines schedule or the CIP list of CIP projects until after it was technically introduced. That helps just give us, I know it depends on the scheduling for staff and everything. The other thing is like the Financial Advisory Board to get their report earlier in the process. I think we do need to change the code to require that, because this year, and especially last year, I think it was worse, but this year we didn't get it until a week or two, I think, before the vote. And it's not enough time to digest what they recommend.
Thank you. Alderman Tierney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To piggyback on what Alderman Arnett said, which was sort of piggybacking on what I said, I can't emphasize enough the early involvement of the entire City Council, as he said, in establishing these policies. And to address this slide and the slide before, I think this is something that we could do in initial work sessions, and having the policy, and then I also think that the budget book should go to each council member at the same time, but to force us to look at it. I know we all work on deadlines. Is then have a work session to go over the budget book, because it's very exemplary that the public doesn't understand the public understands the budget the way we explain it to them. And coming from an estimating process that was very linear to a municipal budget, it was a big learning curve for me. I'm looking at this and saying, oh wait, that's not really an overrun. That's balancing funds, and it's all this fund budgeting is something that we all have to understand, and then we would all agree on whether or not we have a deficit and all that. And we're also going to have a very difficult year next year. We don't know what we're going to be doing, so it's even that much more important. And I'll leave you with this thought that might make your head explode. But when I was training at work, new estimators, I would say, that 70% of the impact you have is in 30% of the time. And how that equates to it's Pareto's law. But how it equates to this is the sooner we get involved, in say 30% of the time before it's due, you have the biggest impact. And so I just think that we have to keep that in mind instead of waiting to the end and making, line item changes.
And I would ask that, we get our requests in as early as possible so we know the needs of the different wards. I know Alderman Gay and myself discovered the Stanton Center shower room need at a council meeting, at a Zoom meeting. That was not something that we were aware of. But David, thank you for addressing that and finding that and moving forward on it. But when we know what's going on in your ward, the sooner we can react and have the departments prepare for it. Thank you.
So maybe because of time constraints, let's jump ahead to slides 6 and 7, which really go to what the Finance Committee is doing. Want to talk through some of the things that we've done there and get some input, but then also talk about the council work sessions because they kind of go together. So this year, the first Finance Committee meeting was the day after the budget was introduced. So nobody has seen the budget book at all. So we spent probably the first week, maybe longer, with the familiarization with the budget book. Maybe that was valuable time. I think it would been better to make the book available and then meet maybe on Friday or a week later to discuss that. We've talked a lot about the department presentations. Where we talked about performance measures, but we're curious about whether the joint meeting with the FAC. I think we had 2 of them. One was the introduction of the budget. One was the capital projects presentation. We had Davenport come to the capital project demonstration. Was that valuable? The community grants process is always hard. It's a small amount of money, but it gets a lot of time and discussion. And then just the number and length of meetings. As far as the council work sessions go, I think you all know we don't necessarily want to be just like the county, but the county doesn't have committees. And so all of their budget meetings are meetings of the council as a whole. So maybe we want to think about that. And we would, I guess, do it via council work sessions where we would make presentations and there'd be a lot of discussions. I think we had 2 this time. I'm not sure if they were any value at all, because it felt like when we got to the end and we're ready to discuss the budget, when after the finance committee did their work, that we were starting all over from scratch. So I'm not sure that those meetings were worthwhile, but would be interested to hear about that. And so these 2 are kind of tied together from that perspective.
Alderman Arnett.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I have to say to City Manager Gerald, I found the PowerPoint presentations that you put together the very best thing that I've seen in the budget process in a long time. It really did tie the threads together. It was in a easy to understand format, and I put them right in front of my. I think we need some muting.
Fred.
I put them right in front of my budget binder, and referred to them quite often. And I also think they were kind of at the level that the council should be operating at. It's concise, it's succinct, and tells you where we're headed. And that gives us the chance to think about, do we need to make a course deviation? I do think the budget book, now that we're getting it more, the budget binder, it's not the budget book, it's the budget binder, more routinized, can have in it the things that Alderman Gay and I do like, which is looking at the details. But that's kind of your own personal nosh. We shouldn't be thinking about passing the budget at that munis level of detail. We should just be able to understand what goes into contracts or supplies or training, those sorts of things. And if there's a big issue, bring it to the council, but not make that the focus of passing the budget. And I have to say that I am thinking that if we do this probably in evening meetings as a budget of the whole, we can hear each other. We can cut out a whole bunch of backtracking. Staff will be putting in a lot of overtime hours, but I do think that we'll make it a process. Hearing from Davenport, hearing from the Financial Advisory Commission, those sorts of things, I think were helpful and necessary. Understanding our debt service ceiling is something we always have to keep an eye on. Understanding our fund balance is something we have to keep an eye on. And in fact, maybe that's something we ought to be thinking about doing. There are certain canary in the coal mine kinds of things that I always look at when I go through the budget. Fund balance, cash flow, those sorts of things. The big tables, the table that was on page 18 and 20, and some of the front summary tables are the kinds of things that give you the big picture and give you an understanding of change over time. So I like the way we're headed. I think that the kinds of things you did, City Manager, were very helpful. And I do think that everybody seems to be moving to this consensus that we need to do it together. If we do it together, maybe we can give the finance staff more time than the first meeting in April to pull together the details. Zip.
Oh, I see Alderman Bayon's hand up.
I think, Mr. Mayor, if I had to pick one of the two, it would be the fact presentation to hear, because they put it more in non-professional layman's terms. They were, I mean, it was more like they were one of us telling us what these things meant. I think that most of what the CPAs could have told us, which we have to get and which we have to review at some point, but in terms of the budget, it probably could have been explained to us in 10 minutes. But the fact, I thought that was good. I thought it was real good.
Hey, Dave, I do have a hard stop at 5, I'm afraid.
It's okay with me.
Can we get a copy of these slides?
Yeah, absolutely. I will send those to you. So let's talk about the budget amendments.
Dave, I just saw Alderman Gay's hand up. Sorry.
No, please. I want to allow him to wrap up, but I have something to say at the end.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to have a little bit of time to discuss the budget amendment process because that was messy. The public didn't know what was going on. In a lot of the cases, the directors didn't know what was going on who were on the call. So I think we need to figure out a better way to do budget amendments when we get down to the end of the budget process.
Alderman Gay?
Ross came. Mine's just off completely not on this subject. So if Ross wants to go first, then.
I would thank you, Alderman Gay. I am working on, and we discussed it at 1 o'clock with the Office of Law, some amendments to look at the amendment process. There's no doubt it was very frustrating for a lot of people, not just department heads and council members, but we actually do have a considerable amount of the public that was trying to follow what we were doing, and they have no clue. We even talked about whether there were some aspects of this that have some Open Public Meetings Act implications. I don't think that's serious, but it is a thought. We really are doing this budget for the public, and they have no way of knowing what we're doing in these council meetings. So I think we need to very seriously think about changing that process. Thank you for your courtesy, Alderman Gay.
Alderman Gay, do you have something for the good of the order, or do you want to do, is it something related?
I do have something, just not on the subject of financing. Are you finished, David? Because I want to allow you time to wrap up.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. So my question is separate and directed to the council to think about, as well as the mayor, of organizing some form of special meeting in the month of August. And I know that that's supposed to be a recess time for everybody, but in light of what's going on, and within 9 days, we could face the worst eviction crisis we've ever seen. Unemployment is scheduled to end in a couple of weeks. I know many of my constituents have already reached out with worries of, like, where do we go? How do we pay for things? And to be quite honest, I don't think we have a legitimate plan. And I've been often pointed to county resources that our residents have, trouble getting access to, that our businesses have trouble getting access to. I don't know if we have a legitimate plan for eviction response within the city. What are we doing for that? And I think that we need some form of work session in the month of August, preferably early in the month, discussing how we plan to respond to that. I don't think it should be left up to just the mayor's office to produce something and, behind the scenes. I don't think it should be left up to David to, put something together with department heads and stuff. I think that we all should be coming to the table, expressing concerns, looking at what we can do, and, just figuring out some balance. Because I know I have a lot of constituents where it is some of your constituents who naturally just reach out to me because they think everything, socially related, that I can do something. And I'm like, well, one, I'm not your older person. And two, we don't really have anything lined up yet. So I think that that's important. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Mayor Buckley, or what even the council's thoughts are on that.
Well, the city will be in full operation. All the resources will be there. I'll be here. The mayor's office.
What resources are that besides having people call to the constituents' response? Do we have actually funding sources set up? I know a big problem that I had with the COVID relief funding that we use is that none of it was going to the communities. Most of it was going to, PPE and staff concerns. Do we have rental recovery resources in place? If not directly through the city and it's through third parties, how are we organizing that? How is that being organized on a consistent basis so that if an email comes through or if a call comes through, they can be directly pointed to somewhere within the city and not call back weeks later and say, well, I haven't got any updates, or I haven't heard anything, or I'm struggling with this application process, or what protocol are you putting in place with your staff to respond to that? I mean,
let me tell you. So the county got $101 million. We got $44 million. The county were very specific that we did not duplicate their resources. So they have rental assistance. They come to us and we will get people to those resources. But we were not allowed to duplicate the resources that the county did. So, but we have Hillary, we have other people in the office that will get people. If you got something specific, send them to me, and we'll get it taken care of. But I'm up for a meeting. It doesn't worry me. I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's going anywhere. Everybody's stuck in the house. I just think that there should be some plan. And if you think that just having constituents response and is capable of handling the increase of evictions, then that's not on me. But thank you.
Yeah, I know. I with your concern, Honorable, I agree. But let's get together on this and talk to the county about their apparatus. They are obviously far more staffed and far more funded with the COVID fund than we were. We did not see any of the state's funding. So if you have ideas, let's see what we can do to put them into action and make sure that we're not duplicating what the county is already doing. Okay. All right. Any other questions, Alderman Paone?
Not a question. It was a motion.
All right.
To adjourn.
Okay. Anything else in good order before we do that? Sorry. Can I get a second? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Show of hands. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.